Thank you.
We'll get going.
Today's focus is all on intersections. And it reminds me, actually, I was just going to share my screen to the module 2 assignment. Ken, is that come up on yours?
Yep.
Yeah,
you can
wonderful.
see the design. Yep.
So thanks for everyone who's already completed this module and seen the assignments come through on the LMS, and they're all looking really, really good. You've got some excellent treatments and things like that coming up. So that's fantastic to see. But just wanted to make point of one design feature that is quite notable. But at the southern end of this job at Wellington Street intersection, if we have a closer look what's going on. So we've got a bicycle lane that is on the curbside, and then it crosses over Wellington Street and continues on the other side of York Street there, which is not an uncommon arrangement. However, if we have a look at what's happening in the traffic lanes, we have a left lane and a through and left lane. So there's actually two left lanes that are occurring here. And I got some little graphics just to make things a little bit easier to explain why this might be an issue or a bit of a concern. If you put yourself in the perspective of the cyclist here in the bicycle lane, and you wanted to travel across in this direction, this vehicle here in the green is likely to be able to see that cyclist because it's kind of right adjacent them and might even be propped out a little bit in front of them. So the ability to be able to see one another and the cyclist noting that the green vehicle is going to slow down and give way to them, that kind of arrangement can probably work itself out in the real world without too great of a risk. We have lots of intersections that use that. I'm more concerned about this red vehicle because if we have a look at their sight lines, the green vehicle actually blocks their ability to see the cyclists because you've got this, what's referred to as a dynamic visual obstruction is the technical term. It's also sometimes called masking. But what could happen in this environment is the green vehicle slows down and gives way to the cyclist carries on. The red vehicle just assumes the green vehicle is slowing down because it's an intersection and they're about to turn left. And they just, prepare to turn left themselves without any acknowledgement that there's a bicycle lane there or there's a cyclist crossing. And it's not until there is that conflict point where those two paths cross over each other that they might actually be able to see each other. So this would be a significant risk, something that we would probably, raise as an unacceptable level of risk just because cyclists are in such a vulnerable position at these types of arrangements. So we'll get into this topic for today's module, exactly how we could treat it and what we could do to improve the safety of the cyclist. But just a little example there of why intersections are sometimes the weak point of our bicycle infrastructure. Again.
I was just back on that one. It was just a sort of, I suppose, specifics of the positioning of some of the vehicles and, how far that green vehicle, where it would prop, should be back from the storage box. But I think the general concept is that dynamic visual obstruction, which can start quite, far back even as well as you're approaching the intersection for the turn. So
particularly if there's multiple vehicles that are backing up there and you just got this wall, where it's very difficult to be able to see over that or through those vehicles. So I was kind of drawing this under free flow conditions as opposed to the vehicle has actually stopped there at a red light. That's why it's slightly above the bike box.
And Michael's also asking, what is the preferred treatment for the weave right movement?
So this is good. This is a really good question because we'll get into some examples of protected intersections, which is I suppose the best practice within this space, but it does make me want to share an example, if I may.
Oh, yeah. If you've got it ready to go.
This is in Toowoomba, And it's kind of this arrangement. Well, let's see if this is playing nice, but the bicycle lane is adjacent to parking there.
Yeah.
And then as we approach this intersection, it's just, they've given this huge box of green, indicate that bicycles should kind of start to push out in front of the traffic lane, because as they approach this intersection, it's left only. And if they want to carry straight, they need to push out in front. So it's similar to that example that we saw in the design, but they're just using paint to demarcate the bicycle lane. You now need to push over in order to keep heading straight, which is not the ideal way to do it, but it is an example of one way to manage that. So good question, Michael.
Well, let's get into some other ways to do it. It sounds like TMR's done some work in that space, evaluating those sort of things. So we might be interested in seeing what some of the outcomes were. But over to you, Max. Let's get into some content.
So all about intersections today. Ken, you've already hit the record button. Thank you very much. And yes, Wally is back on deck today. So there will be a quiz at the end of today's module. So please do remember to take note anytime you see Wally. And I'll be honest, he's a bit trickier to find in this one. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled. This one is not included. Before we did get into the intersections, though, I did want to just talk about one more on-road bicycle treatment that we ran out of time in the last module, or didn't get to in the last module. And it's this bicycle boulevard or advisory bicycle lanes. They've got these installed over in WA, and we've got one that's being trialled at the moment in Napier Street in Melbourne. And it's this idea that instead of always providing 2 lanes of traffic, and always giving them a lane, making the vehicles share one central lane and always giving cyclists a bicycle lane. So it's a bit of a change in the way that we split up our street cross section. It'll make more sense if we just have a look at an example. So this one is actually in, I believe this one was in Canada. I could be wrong though. But you can see here, this carriageway width would only allow for single lane of traffic. So both traffic streams need to share that. However, cyclists always get their bicycle lane. And how this actually works, if we're looking at, here we go. I did have some extra slides here. So vehicles will share the center lane, and if there's any cyclists in the bicycle lane, they have to give way. How this actually works from a perspective of a motorist. So if we just focus on this blue car in the bottom hand of this slide, and you can see the bicycle lanes in this graphic are shown adjacent to car parking. So cyclists are given right of way, and this blue car has seen up ahead that there is an approaching vehicle. The blue car has to prop and get over to the side of the road using the bicycle lane. They do have to yield to any cyclists that may already be there, so they have to really slow down. Once they've seen each other, they're able to use that bicycle lane to pass one another and then hop back into that central lane. So it may seem like a pretty far out concept, but where this is really most appropriate is where we're talking about low traffic speeds, low traffic volumes. We're not using this on, major thoroughfares or anything that we're expecting heavy vehicles or high volumes of vehicles, because it just wouldn't be appropriate. It's purely for those local streets. So I've got an actual photo of what this looks like out on site. So this has been installed, and just a little bicycle priority route as well, just giving them a bit of indication that this is, a cycle area, and it's not being necessarily the primary focus isn't necessarily on general traffic, but instead for bicycles instead. So yeah, there's a bit of information there. And if you are interested in it, thanks for sharing some links there about the advisory bicycle lanes in the chat there. Ken.
And there's a couple of other questions and comments that have come in there. Safe active streets is what they're calling them in WA.
Yeah.
I'll jump to Toby's one and then I'll come back. Is there concern that vehicles will still cut off people on bikes if slightly ahead of the bike and another vehicle is approaching? So it's kind of creating that turbulence, I suppose.
Bike there and then a car here and then just going in front to cut them off. It's certainly a risk, yes, but things like local area traffic management, that kind of speed hump you can see there, just to help slow down all vehicles in there. So that idea that, I can rush in front and get in front of the cyclist, but then in 20 meters time, I'm gonna have to slow down for, this treatment. That will definitely deter that type of behavior. And that's kind of where these treatments are being prioritized. We want to make sure that we've got low speeds and we're not trying to, let vehicles reach higher operational speeds.
Yeah, and we're getting some comments in there. Caused a bit of trouble for the city of Yarra, the Napier Street one, with drivers not familiar with the arrangement. They're thinking it's one way now. So some of those challenges, Toby sort of questioning whether the Dutch version with painted buffer door zones and center medium, which allows the bike to claim the lane or take the lane, is a better option. So it's an interesting one. It kind of links with Michael's question around wide center line. I suppose it's road space allocation really here, but this is for higher speed roads where you start to take some of the lane widths or shoulder for a wide center line to minimize the chance of head-on crashes between passenger vehicles, and how that impacts on bikes. So I don't know where you want to start on all of that, Max, or maybe you want to make some short comments or leave.
Yes, I might just keep it quite high level at this stage and just say, just wanted to offer this as, another treatment that is installed, in other jurisdictions around the world, and we're starting to see it across Australia. So WA does have a few of these streets already set up. So that'll probably be the best point of call to find out any specific evaluations that they've done within this environment, particularly with the engagement. I know that City of Yarra comment and local residents not understanding exactly how it works. And it's just like anything, as soon as you change something that's been like that for decades, as soon as you change that arrangement or, move things around, it's going to create that little bit of uncomfort or, confusion. So I think, being able to communicate to the locals that use that exactly why this project is occurring, how it's going to work, the safety benefits, etc., is a real critical aspect of it. But I would also say that this idea of I'm spending a lot of more time than I thought I would on this, but here we go. This idea of in local streets, we've only got one traffic lane that vehicles need to share in opposing traffic streams is not new. Like, you can go into any local street in inner city areas and there's parking on both sides and there's a narrow traffic lane where you kind of just have to pull into the parking lane and let oncoming vehicles pass you, and you just work it out as you go along. So that type of environment kind of already exists across our network. The difference is we're just prioritizing bicycle lanes through there. So they always get one facility as they travel through these networks, but general traffic doesn't. And
good comments come in there. Alex has said, confusion not necessarily a bad thing if it slows people down and raises awareness of other road users. And certainly sometimes we design a bit of that in with a one-way slow point and the like, with some physical infrastructure, and encourage that slowness and confusion, who's going to give way and the like. Good stuff, Max. Let's keep jumping into it because you got some.
I'm glad
we're 20 minutes in already.
I'm glad I included that slide. That's good. We got some good conversation out of that. Hopefully everyone reviewed the 2 examples for the 360-degree VR footage. Would love to hear your experience in the chat. But on the first example, we had a protected bicycle lane. And example number 2, riding against the dooring zone. And then eventually the bike lane just drops off altogether. So really relevant example of how infrastructure can play on your perspective of safety. So if you haven't watched it, please do. Awesome example. But getting into the content for today, we are talking about intersections, and a lot of our guidance is taken from this appropriately named document called Don't Give Up at the Intersection. So it is a United States publication, but there's awesome information in there, and they provide it all online, so you can reference this as well as all their figures and references. So it's a really good document. But it's really trying to champion this idea of designing a protected intersection. And if you haven't heard that term, and it is still new, certainly within Australia and New Zealand, then we'll go through exactly what those design considerations look like. We'll have a look at some international examples of protected intersection designs, as well as Melbourne's protected intersection design. And then later on in today's webinar, we'll chat about signalized intersections, things like head starts, left and through treatments, hook turns, and providing bicycle signals as well. So a bit to get through with these intersections. Provided this first slide just to show an aerial view of what a protected intersection looks like. So the first thing that you may note is that at each quadrant, that's just a term to mean that each corner of the intersection, there's these kind of little build out areas, sometimes called little refuges or concrete islands. And what they are doing is they're actually providing a separation between the general traffic lane and the bicycle lane. So we've got this offset here. That'll make more sense in a few slides time, but at an aerial view, what's critical to see here is, well, we can see the bicycle lane is kind of provided all the way around the intersection. So there's ability to hop off at each of the legs. So it's not just, one route that's been catered for in this instance. And the main safety feature that provides this, the main feature that provides this level of safety is those little concrete islands that I noted before at each of the quadrants. So let's hop into what this offset means and why it's so important. In a conventional intersection on the left-hand side here, generally the bicycle lane is right up against your left turn traffic lane. There's usually nothing, no separator or nothing in between that space. So you've got this very small offset between left turn traffic lane and your bicycle lane. And what this actually means is, for a vehicle who is turning left, their line of sight is, basically within the windscreen in front of them. What's right in front of them is the adjacent or the minor leg. That's what they're kind of focused on. It's incredibly difficult for a driver to be able to sight backwards and see a cyclist who may be hidden behind them. And for those that have been in this situation where you are cycling in a left turn traffic lane or in a bicycle lane that's right there, it is quite a stressful experience where you're not 100% sure if the vehicle has seen you leading up to this intersection and if they are going to give way as you travel through. And because there's that line of sight issue, or those sight line issues. So that's really the key takeaway from these protected intersection designs. In a protected intersection, what we do deliberately is we increase this offset. So we increase the distance between the bicycle lane and that left turn traffic lane. And that is facilitated by this little island. But the reason that is done is because then when cyclists are actually crossing the path of that left turn vehicle, they are in the line of sight of that motorist. So it's no longer looking back and behind the driver of the vehicle. Cyclists are traveling straight in front of them where they're crossing over. And so it's much easier for a left-turning vehicle to be able to see them and to slow and give way as they cross over. So it's that sightline benefit that is largely seen as a safety improvement for protected intersections. Got a few more plain examples of how a conventional intersection, protected intersection looks. So for a conventional intersection on the left-hand side, you can see left turn vehicle right up against the bicycle lane. And if you could put yourself in the perspective of trying to turn left in that car, and if there was a cyclist that's heading in this direction, pretty difficult to be able to spot them if you hadn't noticed them leading up to the intersection. So instead, what we try and do is try to maximize our sight lines, and that is by providing this offset. So you can see that's the left turn traffic lane on the protected intersection. The bicycle lane, there's a greater offset there that's been provided. And that means as the cyclist goes to travel around here and this left turn vehicle passes, they're right within their line of sight. So right within their field of vision. So it's all coming back to those sight lines. I'll have another quick flick through just some on-ground examples of how this looks. Conventional intersection, I wouldn't actually say this is conventional because there's usually not even any degree of separation between a bike lane and a left turn lane, but you can imagine the cyclist trying to head straight and that left turn lane there. Just that awkward angle, and the motorist trying to be able to see a cyclist trying to look back. Whereas we've got this protected intersection, this is a markup in Caloundra and much better line of sight. You can see that they're basically crossing perpendicular, which means straight in front of the motorist. We'll hop into some design features now. Ken, did you want to?
I think you're going to cover this, but I just wanted to point it out. Some questions around the speed of vehicles and the turn radius.
Yeah.
And also the ability for larger vehicles to sweep over.
All very good questions, and we do chat about that later on. So I'll just put that on hold for a second. Good pickup though. Here we've got some, just a markup of these design features and what needs to be provided at a conceptual level to install a protected intersection. So we'll just go through one by one. The most critical feature really is the corner refuge island, which is, as I said, installed at each quadrant of the intersection. The reason that's so important is because if we have a look at the turning movement of this vehicle, hopefully this is working. Turning movement of this vehicle, you can see that the corner island ensures that they can't just cut across and, take a more leisurely bend across this curve. It's forcing them to actually, take a much tighter radius and provides this improved sight lines at the conflict point. If it weren't installed, what could happen is motorists just traveling like this. And then when you've got the cyclist crossing at this type of angle, it's somewhat improved, but it's not that perpendicular, which we were seeing before, which is a much better outcome. So that's the corner refuge island. So the most critical feature really of these protected intersections. Number two, we've got a protected bicycle queuing area. It's just a fancy way of saying a storage spot for the cyclists. I should have also mentioned that because this is a US jurisdictional guidance document. There's terms that we wouldn't use, so I've just slightly translated things as we have this conversation. But that's just an opportunity for cyclists to be away from the carriageway and also off the footpath, and they can prop and wait there and wait for their green lights to be able to enter the intersection. So there's actually space designated for them. And it's also important to note that they put a stop line there as well, just to make it clear that it's not always a thoroughfare, you know, that they also have the red lights just like general traffic. Number 3 here, we've got the motorist yield zone. We might call that kind of the give way line marking kind of thing. That's just the signalized crossing. So that's just what we would use where we would put dotted line marking for most of our jurisdictions, indicating that that's where there's pedestrians, or in this case, cyclists crossing in this area. There's a pedestrian crossing island, number 4. This one is important to note because it's showing that we're not just sharing this signalized crossing, we're providing a cyclist facility who are presumably traveling at higher speeds, and then we're also providing a pedestrian facility. So there's 2 different crossings for the different road users. And that leads into the first module where we mentioned if you're looking at shared paths and you've got high volumes of both pedestrians and cyclists, you like to split up those road users. It's the same at protected intersections where presumably you've got high volumes of both of those road user types. And we want to make sure that we're giving cyclists, you know, opportunity to maintain their speed. They don't have to slow down and give way to pedestrians or have that risk of weaving in and out of pedestrians. So providing those separate facilities is an awesome way to design these protected intersections. Item number 5, a really good one that's not always employed in these designs, but thinking about how do pedestrians cross over the bicycle lane. So in this instance, a cyclist may be riding in this direction. Just draw an arrow there. And so number 5 has actually detailed, well, let's put a zebra crossing here to indicate to cyclists that pedestrians actually have priority to cross over that bicycle lane. Generally what's done is it's just a bit of a, nothing's painted there. So it's a bit of confusion. Would cyclists just travel straight through there and expect pedestrians to stop for them, or the other way around? I think this idea of giving the priority to the pedestrians makes a lot of sense, given that they are, you know, more vulnerable within this space, and cyclists, you know, they could be traveling at higher speeds. So let's try and get them to slow down and give way to pedestrians crossing here. Also, just generally the pedestrian, you know, our inbuilt history is when we cross over intersections like this, as a pedestrian, we're expected just to go from curb to curb in one phase and not think about having to give way for anyone, you know. So if the onus was put on a pedestrian to pause at some point and give way to cyclists, that kind of cognitive demand may not be, it may be difficult to communicate that to pedestrians. Whereas putting the zebra crossings across a bicycle lane is a pretty instantly recognizable treatment that that's a pedestrian priority spot. I need to slow down. Ken?
I think you're covering this a little bit, but are there different signal times and clearances for the cyclists and the pedestrians at the intersection?
Yes, you can have different phase times and different times where they get the green. So, you know, it will take longer for a pedestrian to cross. So they will perhaps get the red flashing earlier than cyclists crossing over like that. So you can split up those things, but I don't have exact, you know, time details that I could provide. Number 6, last one on this slide, pedestrian curb ramp or pram ramps, just ensuring that there is a smooth connection for pedestrians to be able to access the carriageway, which is likely already available at these signalised intersections. So don't need to spend too much time on that. We'll have a look at an example though. So this one is in the Netherlands. This is the before example. So there isn't a protected intersection here. And I just want to showcase exactly what I've been talking about with these lines of sight and the benefits of protected intersection. So I'll focus on this leg up here at the top of the screen. And you might be able to see that there is a dotted line marking there. That is a bicycle lane. So if we were looking at a cyclist that wanted to travel through this intersection, it was a pretty straight line. I'm pretty happy with that. That's the kind of movement that they would take. And I'll pick another color. I'll go for blue for a general traffic here. And let's assume they want to turn left onto this main thoroughfare here. They would do so like this. Oh, that one wasn't as good. I was too cocky. Let's try that one again. So for motorists that want to turn left within this space, they do so like this. And here we see that really, really tight angle that I mentioned before. So it's clearly not a perpendicular crossing point there. If you were that blue vehicle or that vehicle following the blue path, your ability to see a cyclist that is on the passenger side of your vehicle and possibly behind you, it's very, very, very difficult. So you have to really slow down, or you just have to assume that there's no one there, which is a big risk for cyclists. So that's the before example. Let's have a look at how things looked afterwards. Once again, I'll draw out the paths so you can see how this protected intersection has transformed for that particular leg. So cyclists that were traveling in that direction, now instead they're given this off-road opportunity. They're no longer required to stay on the carriageway to travel south or to the bottom of this page. They can cross over with signals and then carry on their journey. And it looks like there's an off-road path there as well that they can stay on. So they don't even need to re-enter the carriageway in this example. So that's a pretty cool thing. You've already given them off-road opportunities, but also what's a good thing is our vehicle movement crossing over that bicycle path. You can see that angle there is much closer to perpendicular. So it's much easier for the vehicle to be able to see a cyclist. Okay, let's have a look how this one actually looks out on the ground. Bit of a strange one. Maybe I'll hop onto the next slide and I'll see if anyone wants to pick up what would be a peculiar feature about this intersection. And maybe there's a few here, but I'll let you have a little bit of a think, have a look at the slide, and what do you think is perhaps a little bit unusual or maybe not something we would do within our jurisdictions?
I thought Wally was going to come up there. Set that one up. But what apart from Wally are we looking at?
Might be a tricky one to get started with.
Yeah, I suppose there's a number of features that are a bit different. So it's
Alex.
Good. Yep.
Alex, that was the answer that I had in my head. The flushed curves. Bang on. Can we give Alex a prize there, Ken? That's a very interesting feature of this intersection and not one that we would recommend. The reason being, if a motorist, let me get my bearings, this is right turn traffic. So if a motorist was traveling and turning in this direction. Because this separator is flush with the adjacent ground and with the footpath, there's nothing really to stop a motorist from taking a much more leisurely bend or just cutting straight across the footpath. Obviously, they'd have to try and weave in between the traffic signals, but providing this flush pavement that is all the same color as well. So that color palette suggestion as well, pretty unusual. The reason the Dutch can get away with it, is because it's just, you know, part of their culture to expect to see cyclists at every intersection. And, you know, it's not the same, it's just not the same kind of energy that we have within our jurisdiction. So it's really quite an interesting design choice here, because I would suspect there'd be lots of cutting the corner if this were to be installed within Australia, which would really put at risk, you know, this hardware, as well as all the cyclists within that area and pedestrians. But also a good point there, I did see the mention of the shark's teeth. That's what that type of line marking is called. That's just what is used within this jurisdiction and lots of European jurisdictions to indicate give way. Good suggestion. Thanks very much. Another example of a protected bicycle lane. This one is in Maryland in the States. And I believe this one was the one that you're alluding to in last module's chat, Ken, where we actually have a bi-directional facility approaching an intersection. So cyclists can travel both directions only on that leg, only crossing that leg, which is a little bit interesting, but pretty cool example of how this is all being managed, which will be, I've got a photo of it, which will make more sense, but real key takeaways, again, is what we can see. We can see those corner refuge islands installed at each quadrant. We can also see in this example, there's kind of two tiers to those corner refuge islands. So you've got this, what looks like a brick section. That one is raised up. And we've got this section in gray as well. And that one is flush, or it's at the carriageway level. Let's have a look how this looks out on ground. So we can see there's our raised section. And there's the concrete flush section. Any suggestions from the group as to why we may have made that flush section and not just built out that entire raised section? So why would there be those two different levels? Toby is spot on. Oh, here we go. I can see all the answers coming through there. That's exactly correct. So it's for heavy vehicles. That's right. They require much wider turning circles and they need more space to be able to navigate it, these turning maneuvers. So what this design has done, and what's very common at these protected intersection designs, is to create one raised section, and that is to limit heavy vehicles from, you know, just tracking over the entire intersection, but also a mountable area. So heavy vehicles can track over this section. However, it's still delineating this is the preferred turning movement that general traffic should use. So it's not just a little island and then nothing but carriageway. It's still indicating to motorists that you should still take this tighter radius turning at this intersection. Lots of nice color in this example, and this kind of using chevron arrows to communicate that this is bi-directional. So it's quite a unique example in Maryland. I believe it's adjacent to university, so perhaps that's why there's so much cycling activity. Ken?
Question around the capacity there for bike storage while they're waiting to turn. And is that an issue you see at other ones?
That's actually a really good point. Yeah, so there usually is that storage bay that's demarcated. So if I was a cyclist, I could, you know, prop here and give way, and that's usually specified, or maybe even further back. But it doesn't look like that's really been provided at this example. So what could happen if you had, lots of cyclists in this area is this queuing effect, which could block the passage of cyclists that want to travel in this direction, or you could block the pedestrian crossing as well. So there are risks in not clearly demarcating that. There's also a risk that cyclists may just head straight across because it could just look like one continuous facility. It's probably unlikely that you would think they would notice the red traffic signals and think they need to stop. But yeah, that's a really good point. Like I would certainly recommend to install that and to make it as obvious as possible that this is where cyclists can stop and prop and wait until they get their green light.
Yep.
One more example and then we'll hop on to some new content, but this one may look a little bit more familiar, just probably how we would design things within our jurisdictions. This one's in Manchester in the UK, and it is called the Cycle Optimise Protected Signals Junction, which is an abbreviation for Cyclops. So just remember Cyclops. We've got the same story here where we can see our corner refuge islands being installed at each quadrant. One of the things that I really like about this one is these bike boxes are huge. They're really, really apparent. So they certainly let motorists know that cyclists are expected in the area. But on top of that, what they actually enable is if I was a cyclist and I didn't want to have to, take this long route and wait for all the traffic and wait for my signals to turn right. Instead, I'm going to perch myself in this bike box. I'm going to head into this traffic lane and turn right, just as a conventional vehicle would. There's nothing to say that a cyclist cannot do that. It may not be the best safety outcome in terms of, it's not exactly how this design is intended to work. However, as we know, for those that are commuter cyclists or you cycle for exercise or for speed or whatever it is, you may not be attracted to a more meandering path regardless of the level of safety that it offers you, because you could feel my own perception of safety, I think I'll be okay to head through this. So it still offers that as an option, which there's a debate as to whether or not you should offer that, or it should just be always the safest way possible through every intersection. But I'm probably on the side that, we need to be realistic, and some cyclists just want to get from A to B and be as, efficient as possible. And providing that as an option for them is a good solution within this space. Have a look how this looks out on sites. So that's a bit of a panoramic and just some people using it here. Yeah, that's the Manchester one. I'll hop into the Melbourne example, check in with Ken though, make sure I didn't miss any questions.
Well, it's more a point around the space that these might take up.
Yeah, I think that perfectly segues into this next section, which is for the Melbourne protected intersection, where we can actually see the before and after and how the traffic lanes are affected.
Yeah, and it does, I suppose Michael's asked a bigger picture question around why we don't see more of these around Australia, but I might let you answer that after we do see an Australian example here. You started with a lot of international ones.
Correct, yes. It's a good question, Michael. This is the before example of a protected intersection. So just thought we'd show this, and we'll just focus on the right-hand side just to make things a little bit easier. But if we have a look at this approach to the intersection, what we had previously, we had a bicycle lane that was adjacent to it was adjacent to the curb, and parked vehicles were pushed out. So it's somewhat of a protected bike lane. However, there wasn't physical separators. There was some flexible bollards, but I'm getting too technical. It's basically just a bicycle lane on the curb side of this carriageway. As cyclists approached the intersection, it just disappeared. So there was no treatment leading up to this intersection until right at the intersection, there was this tiny little bike box to indicate that, you know, you can prop in front if you've managed to negotiate that intersection so far. But what we do have at the intersection itself is we have a left turn lane, a through, and I believe that's through and right. We'll have a look at how things look after this installation of a protected bicycle lane. So this is obviously split halfway down the middle, so you can see before and after. But you can see the protected function now continues all the way up to the intersection. So there's no longer that little area where it's just a bit of a free-for-all and there's no treatments in place. That protection is provided all the way up to the intersection. And in terms of our stand-up lanes or the traffic lanes at the intersection, we had 3, now we have 2. So technically the bike lane or the protected bicycle infrastructure has eaten up one of the traffic lanes, which may upset a lot of people within the signal space or within the trying to make sure that congestion is avoided at all costs. And I would just issue this advice with a bit of a caveat, but if we are looking within cycling corridors and we are looking at, you know, bicycle networks, and we've identified these are the most critical within our city, within our township, within our, you know, jurisdiction. If we're only treating mid blocks and we kind of give up at the intersection, that won't be enough to attract, you know, high volumes of cyclists using that facility, because people are very nervous when it comes to intersections. Intersections are generally considered the kind of the weak chain within this system. So we're generally quite good with mid-block sections and also off-road paths, but it's this point here, coming to the intersection and getting cyclists through the intersection safely, that over the years we're progressively getting better, but we certainly haven't applied things consistently along routes. And we'll just reiterate, if you've got a strategic cycling corridor, you've nominated this is exactly where we want cyclists to be, we should be really prioritizing safety treatments that not only protect cyclists through there, but encourage cyclists. Because there's no point in building infrastructure that only treats from A to B but doesn't do C, D, or E. We've got to look at the entire route and try and, you know, encourage safe journeys within that space. So it's about the safety, but it's also about getting, you know, more people on the bicycle and prioritizing that as a mode of transport within this area, which is what's been done here. So it has eaten up a traffic lane, but that wasn't the goal of this project. The goal was to improve cyclist safety. That was my little spiel. Sorry, that went longer than I thought as well. Here's the after intersection. Once again, you can see, I'm sure this terminology has become part of your makeup, but the corner refuge islands provided at each intersection. And just to clarify, just in case things aren't clear, if you are a cyclist and perhaps you get a red light, you can stop either at this point here if there's pedestrians crossing in front of you, or if you were already within entering, you could stop at this point here where there is a little dedicated refuge area. You could get a green light and then travel across, and perhaps you wanted to turn right, so you'd stop here again. Once again, there's a designated area for you to stop and store. You'd wait for the green phase to occur on that north-south leg, and then you can travel along your way. So there are multiple phases if you were turning right in order to, you know, make that journey. But in terms of the safety that this treatment offers with the improved line of sight, physical protection from general traffic, it's just a wonderful example. This particular design, it had a few iterations. So just a plain level example of how things were progressing along. The feature I want to focus on most though, is that corner refuge island, because it did go through several design phases. So we'll just get started on the left-hand side here. This is how things started out, just a tiny little jelly bean, considered, well, that is providing some level of protection, and hopefully it's going to provide that offset that we talked about between the bicycle lane and the left turn traffic lane. But after a few discussions, well, we thought, well, that's probably may not be seen by cyclists or by general traffic. They may just drive straight over that little hump. So we'll try and make it a little bit bigger. So that's how we came to this type of solution. But then we did some swept path analysis, and we thought, well, these kind of tight parts of the corner aren't really going to work for heavy vehicles. So instead, we'll go for a much more rounded shape. Let's just get a nice smooth radius to help with those turning movements. Then there's a bit of a decision and thinking about, well, what about cyclists who would store within that area? Do we have enough room for them to, prop their bikes here? And what if there's a build-up of all those cyclists? So then we cut out a little bit more of this space to create this kind of, I don't know what shape you would call that, like a bendy straw or a sad worm. And then the final design that we opted for was what's seen out there on site. Is there's these mountable areas, which is in that darker grey, and then raised section as well. So just like in the previous example, we have the mountable concrete apron to allow for the heavy vehicles to track across that, and the raised is used as a form of separation. Another interesting part of this particular project, because this was the first within Melbourne, and anything new is generally seen as something scary and needs to be tested, even though it's been installed for many years in many different jurisdictions. In order to get people across the line, this particular intersection was marked up on a 1-to-1 scale. This is an off-road facility, so no general traffic can enter this. This is a depot. Line marker came out and measured everything exactly as it is out on site and how things would be installed. Obviously, it's not the raised features, but this is all just been done with paint. And then lots of different stakeholders got to hop on their bicycles as well as on just walking as a pedestrian, while this test vehicle performed a variety of maneuvers in front of them, turning left, turning right, heading through. Cyclists got to experience all those different things. I got to experience exactly what it felt like, performing this maneuver around the corner refuge islands and how comfortable that was. Could they maintain their speed? Could they see the islands, etc.? So this was a big stakeholder engagement activity. People from council, from the department, consultants, all involved to get this together to make sure that, this could work on ground, and just an aerial image of this occurring. Really brilliant example of how these sight lines are also working here. If I've got my motorist here, they're kind of focused on crossing traffic. So these cyclists, as they get closer, will be able to, see one another. Similarly to that pedestrian crossing as well, if they're within that line of sight. Ken, I might open it up for a poll just to make sure that we've got everyone on board with protected intersections, and give me a chance to have a drink of water.
Sure. Okay. The poll will be popping up now. The most important feature of protected intersection is maximising sightline between motor vehicles and cyclists, conflict paint, banning general traffic movements, separate phasing for general traffic and bicycle traffic. Now, while people are having a think about that, there's questions come in. The islands there, do they need to, do you need to have the mountable section on the sides of it, or is it just the ends that you are thinking about? So
it's a good question. It'll make more sense when we have a look at the next slide. We can see how it looks out on the ground, because I agree that the plan view doesn't really show it quite well how that has been installed. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. We'll get onto that. And seeing some answers come in. We'll give it 5 more seconds. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to end that, and I'm going to display the results. And most people, almost everybody is saying maximizing sightlines between motor vehicles and cyclists. Happy with that, Max?
Sensational. Good to hear. Yes, and I agree with that. So thank you very much. Thanks, Ken. We'll just show a little snip now of heading towards this protected intersection, being on a bicycle and interacting with a left turning vehicle. So here we have the protected bicycle lane as we're heading up onto the approach. That's our semi-mountable curb profile that I was talking about in last module. A little bit more forgiving, so you can ride on top of that and less likely to fall off, but not the focus of today. You can see this cyclist, they want to head through. Oh, I forgot I've actually got little animations for this. I don't need to draw this one. Cyclist, I'm just going to denote in this yellow, really bright yellow arrow. They want to head on through. And this taxi is turning left within that green arrow. So we're going to use those same types of colors. Also make a note that the signals are clearly showing green. There's both a bicycle phase and a general traffic lantern as well. So both of those lanterns showing green. So we're both okay to be able to perform our left turn and through maneuvers. So let's see in a second later, this point in time, this is how things are looking. Once again, this is the yellow arrow. This one is actually showing what a conventional intersection would look like. So traditionally, a cyclist would be taking that route and a vehicle would obviously just be turning left, taking there. But in our protected intersection, we've got this little, we're applying this offset where we're getting further away from that traffic lane before crossing over. So the important thing to note there is in the conventional one, we would have to make a decision right now at this point, whether or not this taxi has noticed us as a cyclist. They've seen us on approach. And if they haven't, then we would need to be slowing down, assume that they're just going to head straight through and turn left. So we need to slam on the brakes because it's very unlikely, as you can see, for us to be able to make eye contact with that driver and for them to be able to see us, even in the side mirrors, very unlikely where cyclists would be able to be spotted there. And in answer to the question about the mountable apron, so it does look like it's, in this case, it has just been installed either side of it, but I've got to say I have seen them installed on the kind of intersection side of things as well, but all of that would have been undertaken with swept path analysis and would have shown exactly where heavy vehicles are tracking, and that's where that mountable section has been installed. So yeah, there's certainly a science behind exactly where you would install that feature. Final slide is just 1 second later again. Yellow is the conventional intersection. Green is the path of the vehicle. And here is a really good example where you can see this big offset between the turning vehicle and the bicycle lane. And if you also look carefully in the vehicle through the windscreen, you can see that that taxi driver, it looks as if their face is actually positioned towards the cyclist crossing. So this is doing a really fantastic job and illustrating exactly how the protected intersection works and the benefits that we have here. Final thing about the protected intersections is just ensuring that as we lead up to the intersection, there is adequate sight lines for both the cyclist and the vehicle. Might make sense in this New Zealand version of it, but What we don't want to see is we don't want to have lots and lots of parked vehicles all the way up to the intersection, and then there's just suddenly, a conflict point and a protected intersection. We want to ensure there's a clear space to ensure that as vehicles are heading up to the intersection, they can sight a cyclist that may already be heading through, and vice versa. So it works also for the cyclists. So they know if a vehicle is about to turn left in front of them. And this is applicable to all intersections, not just protected. But you just want to ensure that those lines of sight are available approaching any intersections that are crossings. Got another engagement for everyone today. What is wrong with this photo? So we've got another signalized intersection. I might shift that banner down and we can have a quick look, get the magnifying glass out, see what you can spot. Anything that piques your interest, anything that you'd consider a hazard, let us know in the chat.
Well, people have a think about that. Michael's asked there, would you consider using flashing orange arrow for the left turner, or using a red arrow to delay the start of the left turn?
Yeah, I know they do that in Queensland, and I actually think that's a good idea. I think it's, particularly if it's controlled by a loop. So say there's a loop 50 meters away and a cyclist crosses over that as they're heading up to the intersection, and that that then triggers whatever it is, some type of sign or a lantern, an orange flashing left turn arrow, just to show that, okay, there's a cyclist that has crossed over that point, therefore there's going to be a cyclist coming up at this intersection. Be aware of that. I think it's a very very clever treatment. What's your thoughts, Ken?
Yeah, I like it as well, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. Now we're getting on to people talking about this diagonal crossing arrangement that cyclists are having to do. And people are a little confused by that. Yes.
Yeah, it's very unusual, actually. This bi-directional facility is deciding to head diagonal across to the other side of the road. And I suppose the idea is, well, we know cyclists don't want to have to cross over here and then cross over there. So we'll just try and make this as convenient as possible, just the shortest route, most direct. But bit unusual. I know in Wollongong they're thinking of doing a similar thing where they have a very similar treatment, a bi-directional one side, they want to shift to the other side. So there's this also proposing to do something similar over there. But I'd be interested if anyone else has any examples of this particular treatment, because it's not something I come across often. Did I mention this was in Canada? This is in Canada. So yeah, a little bit of a peculiar example. Planter boxes as well. Bit of an unusual treatment, and just the quality of this pavement looks pretty average. But anyway, those are just finicky little points. We'll hop on to our signalized intersections and we'll talk about our head starts. These are also referred to as bike boxes, or just areas where cyclists can prop in front of general traffic at the intersections. Within the Austroads guide, there are some different examples, and they also provide situations where they may be appropriate to provide these. I've got to say, example C is just a really bizarre treatment. It seems really strange that you wouldn't just have this one wide box, that you would kind of separate it. So I can't say I've seen that all too often installed. That's letter C. I should have crossed it out there. But what bicycle boxes are really useful in doing, they put cyclists in front of general traffic, so they don't have to squash up in between queuing traffic. They can head to the front of the intersection. They're most prominent, so it provides that level of safety right in front of everyone. So that's a really big treatment. That's a big safety benefit. The other useful thing about bike boxes is they can also let cyclists know, where does this bike path go from now? So for example B and example A, for instance, it's likely that a bicycle can travel through or left, but there's no real, design, or there's nothing really to indicate that a cyclist can turn right because the bicycle box isn't provided there as well. If we compare that to example D, where the bike box is across all lanes, that communicates to cyclists that a bicycle lane is present here, going left, going through, going right. So take your pick. And it's just a useful kind of delineation or wayfinding measure as well. So it's got the safety benefit. It's also got that as well. Left turn and through treatments. Now, these are relatively difficult. There's, apart from the protected intersection where we're trying to separate the two road users, cyclists get one space and general traffic the other. These are much more common across our network. Not these ones in particular, but this kind of idea. So in this example, what we're actually saying is you've got a bicycle lane, and then at some point, we're just going to have to let cyclists share this traffic lane because we don't have a separate facility. So they're communicating that through the use of those sharrows, which we've talked about before. This other example is trying to cross over, similar to that Toowoomba example that I showed before, and get cyclists in a more prominent position and trying to maintain that bicycle lane all the way up into the intersection. In this particular graphic, you can see that really narrows the traffic lane. It doesn't look like it'd be wide enough to even facilitate a vehicle to prop there. So I've got to say these ones are probably more common, but let's have a look out on site what left turn and through treatments can look like. So this is my commute into work, this intersection. On the right-hand side, as I'm heading into work, I have a bicycle lane that's adjacent to the dooring zone, and I'm traveling along there. As I get to the intersection, I'm given these sharrows. So that's similar to that example that I showed on the previous slide, which is just saying bicycle lane ends, but you now just share this traffic lane with general traffic. So, and then I head on through to the intersection, and then I get another bicycle lane against the dooring zone. I'm a relatively confident, comfortable cyclist, so not the end of the world for me, but it's, well, if there was an off-road link all the way there, I'd be pretty happy with that too. But let's have a look at my journey on my way home. So I've just spent a grueling, just smashing through all the work as I want to do, Ken, those late hours, etc. I'm heading, I'm heading home. Once again, I'm in a dooring zone, and I get to this point here. Oh, my pen just decided to play very poorly. I get to this point here and there's nothing. You'll see this is a through traffic lane. This is a left turn traffic lane. This is a right turn traffic lane. No bike boxes, nothing. The bike lane just ends and there's no treatment whatsoever for cyclists. This is incredibly common, or surprisingly common, I should say, where the intersection has just been a too difficult area to deal with for cyclists, so they've just done nothing. And there might be a sign that says bike lane end, and that's just, good luck. You can see on the other side of the intersection, the bike lane does continue. So it's not as if they're saying that this cycling facility just no longer exists. It's no treatment has been applied at this intersection. So my way to work, I'm pretty happy with that. It is what it is. It's not perfect, but it kind of works. Way home from work, a bit more nervous because as I start to head out and claim this traffic lane, motorists may not expect me to do that, basically. They might be like, I thought you were staying by the curbside next to the parked vehicles. I don't want you near me. This is my lane. So yeah, just one example of how this one intersection has two different treatments, even though it's got basically the same facilities on both sides. Another really challenging type of environment, which is super, super common on arterials where we do have on-road bicycle lanes, but if it crosses over a slip lane, basically, yeah, it's just this awkward period here where a motorist has to cross over the bike lane, and sometimes it's treated with conflict paint, other times it's just a bicycle lane. I'd certainly recommend conflict paint as a minimum. In an ideal world, if we could get cyclists, off-road and crossing at these, much more perpendicular angles, and also provide a priority crossing, raising it up as well, that would be a terrific example of how to treat these. But also acknowledge, if you were doing that at every signalized intersection, it's unlikely cyclists would use it. So yeah, it's a difficult space to play in. But just there are some ways to kind of deal with that. Hook turns. Now, Ken, I believe I saw you post something on our Triple S LinkedIn regarding hook turns, and just wondering if you wanted to share that so we can see exactly, for those that aren't familiar with a hook turn treatment.
Yeah, sure. I did post this yesterday. I'm sure some of you that follow us on Safe System Solutions saw it, but I just hit the record. Well, it was a while back on my commute at this hook turn there. And you can see there, slot myself in. Positioning of this one's just slightly off where I'd like it. I get myself very close to the curb there to avoid the car. You see that red car comes up. It's sort of in your lane, but yeah. Okay, there you go. That's the hook turn boxes, the marking of it. Of course, you do that as a cyclist without that often. You just go in there and do it, but you can mark it and to encourage that.
Thanks, Ken. Perfect example. So those markings there are to indicate to cyclists that this is a spot for you to pause and wait until you get the green the other way, and then you can just head off and complete that right turn. Benefit in this is you don't have to cross over multiple lanes to, if you're a cyclist on this, for instance, you don't have to cross over into this right turn lane and cross over a through lane as well as a right turn lane. Don't have to worry about those conflict points. Let's just separate things, pause, wait here till you get your green, and then continue your journey. So you can see that this intersection, it is provided at each of the legs, and that also provides a little bit of wayfinding so cyclists know that, okay, all of these legs should have appropriate or some level of cycling infrastructure. So they should all, I should be able to ride my bike, any of them. So it's got also that, yeah, that little benefit of it too. Oh, it's just an example of what it looks like on ground. Another example of how you could treat these, if you were expecting lots of right turn traffic, this is an example at a T intersection, but you could provide kind of like a little separated treatment. And you could put a pedestal here or a traffic signal, and a cyclist could pause at this location, push the button to make sure that they're going to eventually get their light, and then cross over at this location. So there are examples of this actually occurring. Oh, this one kept all my ink on the page. This one's in Adelaide. So you can see there's a bicycle lane adjacent to the curb there. Cyclists that want to turn right, they actually get this little bay to turn. They can prop here, push the button. Once they get the green to go across, they can head across and continue their journey. It's just another way that that right turn can be managed. Much more comfortable than if you're a cyclist and trying to head all the way across here into the right turn lane and then crossing with all your other traffic. I'd much prefer to be pushing the button and take that extra 30 seconds. Did want to add this little anecdote of bicycle signals. Bicycle signals, yep, just remembering which slide I'm up to. So bicycle lanterns or head starts, it's this idea that if we give, so I should also clarify, this is, as you can see, an enormous intersection. And this photo is taken down at this bottom leg, and the movement that we're interested in this right turn. So here's how things look on the ground, and obviously things are at red at the moment, but what is actually hidden is just on the side of that lantern, there is a bicycle phase. So it's just a green bike lantern, and that goes ahead of traffic, general traffic. So that would turn green prior to general traffic getting to enter this intersection, traveling in that direction and that direction. It's only like 3 to 5 seconds, so it's not like a massive amount of time, but super useful on cycling corridors where you are prioritizing cycling connectivity, and it just makes the journey so much more attractive as a cyclist when you actually get to go in front of general traffic, both, you know, like in a speed sense, but also in a safety sense as well, because you're no longer starting from, you know, as everyone would be aware, it's obviously a lot harder to get momentum from stopping to, you know, meeting that traveling speed if you're a cyclist, as opposed to a vehicle where you just push your pedal down and off you go. So if you're able to get to speed before general traffic enter that intersection, there's just that wonderful benefit there as well. But anyway, my anecdote from this particular intersection, as I was also traveling home, my home was out to the right, so I wanted to head right, and I was in this tiny little bike box thing here, and, you know, thinking, okay, I know I need to turn right at this intersection, and I saw the green lantern go off, and so instinctively I thought, okay, well, I know that all other traffic have stopped, so I'm just going to head straight across and cross all those traffic lanes and tram lines, and we'll have a look how things looked aerial view. Hop into this one. So this is the movement that I was taking. But because there's only that short period of time where you've actually got that bicycle only phase, there is some point in time where you enter the intersection where general traffic will also enter. So what actually ended up happening, in this example, for me, I was okay, but it just made me ponder what could happen. A cyclist may get halfway through this intersection, perhaps here, and that's when the rest of general traffic get that green. So they're potentially in a very, very dangerous situation, and this is in the middle of, you know, 10 traffic lanes and 2 tram lanes, and that's when general traffic may get their green light. So there's certainly a risk of a conflict point here. So I just wanted to share that little bit of a story to show that the bicycle lanterns are generally installed to show a through movement, because cyclists, they get the head start and they're intended to carry through, which may not meet the needs of all cyclists, but that's the intended purpose of it. A good way that perhaps that could be communicated to cyclists that aren't familiar with that particular intersection, like myself, would be perhaps to add just a little arrow under the bicycle symbol. Oh no, I shouldn't have drawn a bike. There we go. So just having those to communicate exactly that's the direction where you've got the priority, but not if you want to turn right. Anyway, just an example of how those things can work. Got an example here. This one is in Perth, WA, and it's actually got the bicycle lantern or the bicycle signals as part of the same signal face as the traffic signals. So it's not like a separate unit, which I think is a pretty sensible idea. But once again, this is an opportunity for cyclists within this corridor here to access the intersection first. They get priority, they head on through, and then eventually general traffic will pass. Another thing to consider within the bicycle signals is if we have a green here and we have a steady stream, which does occur in peak hours of cyclist traffic heading through. Eventually, depending on what type of arrangement you've got with your phasing, but sometimes the green just drops off and that's it, to say you no longer have a head start. In this example in Perth, the green is always on until it goes to amber and then red. But what can happen is you can have a left turning vehicle that's kind of just waiting and waiting and waiting. And it's that same idea as the protected intersection. Very difficult position for them to be able to look backwards and see this stream of cyclists that may be coming, just because there's no offset, there's no corner refuge island that we talked about before. Because the bicycle lane is so close to the general traffic lane, the left turning vehicle, kind of just has to be very, very patient and either head through there very slowly or, risk potentially colliding with the cyclists at that area. Final slide of today. This is an example of a bicycle infrastructure project that is occurring at this intersection. So this intersection is actually undergoing cyclist safety improvements. They're building some protected bike lanes all the way up to there. But what we can see in the meantime, as part of the temporary traffic management, is our bicycle lane is just closed, and that's it. It's up to you from now on. This is unfortunately very, very, very common, where we just see the temporary closure of bicycle lanes without any afterthought as to how cyclists actually travel through that area. What this particular example communicates previously, leading up to this point here, there's actually separated treatments. So it was a protected bicycle lane, which is just out of the photo here, basically up until this point. In other words, you've got this really good cycling treatment up until this point, which is perhaps, getting a range of cyclists' abilities using this. So you could have children using this facility, people who just hate being near general traffic. And then you've got them to this point and there's no forewarning or anything, where it just ends. And so cyclists are forced to merge in with general traffic, which a lot of cyclists are not comfortable in doing. There's no sharrows there to say that this is a shared area now. It's just the bike lane ends. You also may have noticed that the curb, there's no pram ramp or anything there. So a cyclist can't just quickly, hop up and onto the curb and onto the footpath to then maybe just walk through the area. There's none of that either. So just another consideration, if you are building any cycling improvement projects, think about this stage as well. How exactly are we going to manage cycling safety, not just post-construction, but during construction? There are some pretty nifty examples out there of, predominantly getting cyclists up onto the footpath area and creating a shared path type of situation, using lots and lots of paint to kind of demarcate this as a shared zone. And it's not just a bicycle path, it's pedestrians are here as well. And there's a few things that we can do here, but this option here of just saying bike lane ends and hoping for the best is not one we'd recommend. Ken?
No, just getting ready to ask if we have a 360-degree vision for today. There was a good point in there around the sort of trust required that people don't run red lights and the implications of that, which I think is a fair point. But 360-degree footage for this session. There
is. Did you want me to pop it up, or have you got it on your screen?
Well, I've got the learning management system up and running, so I'll just share my screen just to remind everybody, although everybody's getting really good at using the learning management system, and know that we've got the quiz for today. So make sure you jump in and get onto that one. There we've got the 360-degree vision for this module, which has some nice vision to help us. It's probably going to give me an ad here, isn't it? Oh, no. Straight to Max, and I've got you on mute, Max, though. at our intersection there, so you can get a view for that. And as usual, a bit of riding through the intersection there, which will help you visualize it from as close to within the saddle as actually getting in the saddle. And that pretty much wraps it up. Max, anything else there? We don't have an assignment for this module. Next module, there's a final assignment for you to do. And what do we cover next module?
Next module is roundabouts. So we've separated that from the intersections because it is its kind of own topic in itself. It's yeah, lots to explore in that space.
Good. Thanks, Max. Thanks everybody for the wonderful input as usual. And we look forward to seeing you at our final session on Thursday.
Fabulous. We'll talk more then and talk about the final assignment. So take care and look forward to chatting then. See ya.
Bye.